Young women, underage girls taken from small towns and cities across Ontario and forced into sex work. That's what the province's Select Committee on Sexual Violence and Harassment heard from witnesses. And that's what's led them to name Ontario a major hub for human trafficking. Joining us now to help us understand what exactly is going on, via Skype from Christchurch, New Zealand, Olivia Carville, investigative reporter at the New Zealand Herald. She's formerly of the Toronto Star. And here in our Toronto studio, Martin Dick, lead detective with the Halton Regional Police Services Human Trafficking and Vice Unit, Carly Kalish, individual and family therapist at East Metro Youth Services, and Laurie Hermston, advocacy coordinator at the Native Women's Resource Centre of Toronto. Hello to all three of you in Toronto, and to you, Olivia, in New Zealand.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Hello.
Okay, human trafficking becomes part of our criminal code about a decade ago, 2005. The police, the pimps, the victims call this human trafficking thing that we're going to talk about the game. And the Ontario Committee, which I referenced earlier, calls it a form of modern-day slavery. And I want to read something that comes from that committee's final report. So here we go. It's a bit lengthy, so stick with me. Here's what they said. Victims, mostly women and children, are deprived of their normal lives and forced to provide labor or sexual services through a variety of coercive practices, all for the direct profit of their traffickers. Globally, it is estimated that human trafficking is amongst the most lucrative of criminal activities, generating billions of dollars annually for criminal organizations. While human trafficking is commonly associated with foreign victims crossing international borders, recent charges and convictions indicate that the vast majority of victims in Canada, over 90% of them, are trafficked domestically. So that's from the Select Committee on Sexual Violence and Harassment from their final reports, Provincial Committee. Olivia Carville, let me begin with you. When I read those words, I wonder what makes this different from prostitution.
There's a big difference between prostitution and human sex trafficking. Mostly it comes down to choice. With prostitution, which has been around since the beginning of time, the woman has the choice to get into it. She can choose how many men she sees in a day, what services she provides these men, and she gets to keep that money that she earns. With human sex trafficking, these victims lose that choice. The choice over how many men they see, what services they provide those men, and whether they keep that money or not is down to their pimp. It's down to their trafficker.
Okay, so this is the distinction. And Martin, I want to give you some stats, and I want you to just fill in the gaps beyond the stats. Here they are. These come from Covenant House, Toronto. So in 2014, Toronto police saw an increase of 113% in occurrences of sex trafficking, as well as a 360% increase in arrests over the previous year. This has been described as one of the fastest growing crimes in this province. Yeah. Why are we seeing this growth now?
I think it's a twofold kind of answer that I could give you to that. One, you're seeing more law enforcement resources being looked to target that particular crime type. So with that, you'll see an increase in these statistics for sure. Also, it's such a lucrative trade, right? I often analogize this to the fact that, you know, if you have a drug dealer and they buy a kilo of cocaine, they can cut that drug up multiple times, but they can only sell it once. They can only sell that kilo of cocaine once. With a sex trafficking victim, that trafficker can sell that victim 10 to 12 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that's the real issue.
So it could be a reused resource, to put it crassly.
That's exactly what it is, yes. Yeah.
Okay, Carly, as I mentioned, you know, I think when most people think of human sex trafficking, we think of, you know, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia. That this is where these girls are coming from. These are Canadian-born. These are Canadian girls and women. Who are these women? What type of women are being swept up into this world?
So it really can be anyone. And if you think about the risk factors sort of in two categories. So the first category being individual risk factors, such as low self-esteem, lack of self-worth, issues with family, potential previous abuse, issues with school, bullying, things like that. And then you think of the systemic factors and the societal factors of being racialized, being Aboriginal, being a girl, being from a community where there's a high proximity to crime, being in a neighborhood that lacks social resources. If you think about checking off those on one side of the list and then the other side of the list, and thinking about people who might have check boxes on both of those lists, those people are at the highest risk of being trafficked.
Okay, they're the highest risk. Are they the only ones? Or are middle-class white girls being absorbed into this?
I think across the board there are varying degrees of individuals that are involved in this trade. Yes, predominantly I would suggest to you that certainly in my experience that young girls that Carly has indicated to you are the individuals at highest risk. But yes, I don't think anyone is immune, and these are girls that live next door to you. You know, that like nobody is immune. We've had in Canada, you know, teachers that have been trafficked victims in this country. You know, educated individuals, but through circumstance and through manipulation and coercion, find themselves ingrained and distanced from their families and becoming involved in this trade.
Okay, we're going to talk about that coercion in a bit, but I want to figure out. You say young girls. I think you said young women. How old are these people?
I'm seeing, you know, I'm hearing about victims as young as 13 years old that we're learning
Kids,
about.
babies.
Children, yeah, children that are coming from very complex backgrounds. A lot of them come from child welfare or effects of child welfare. And in the Indigenous community, that's a big issue. I mean, we know recently from the Canadian Human Rights decision that 38% less funding to Indigenous children through child welfare. A lot of these kids are coming from those environments. So, you know, it's about having these supports for these children. And anywhere from 13, 15, 18, I see girls 21, 22, up to, you know, 30 and older. So they are all different ages and ranges.
At East Metro, we've had our youngest client who was trafficked when she was 12 years old. The average age of clients that we see, we work from 12-year-olds all the way to 29-year-olds with greater spectrum of definition of youth. The average age is 16.
16 years old.
That's right.
And when you say, when we see these clients, how many people like this are you seeing on a yearly average where you?
So our program is quite new. We've been around for about 2 years, and we've seen over 60 clients, 60 young women who identify as being survivors of domestic human trafficking.
Wow. And how do they get to you? Do they come on their own?
So the coolest referrals are when clients tell each other about our services and spread the word that way. But a ton of our referrals are from child welfare, the police, and our partnering agencies such as Boost, Child and Youth Advocacy Centre, etc.
Martin, help me out here. How do these, maybe they're not guys, all these pimps, I'm assuming most of them are guys. How do they get their hands on these girls? How do they find them?
That's a real complex situation as well. A lot of it's through coercion, like I mentioned to you, but there's multiple different approaches that are used by pimps and traffickers to recruit these vulnerable young girls. And I'll say predominantly it is like young females that are the victims of this particular trade and this particular crime. But some of them will play the boyfriend card. You know, they will groom these girls into believing.
You can go meet them at school, at the mall, what?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like if you think about it, and I don't like to highlight it too much for obvious reasons as well, but you know, you pick areas. These people are smart. They pick areas that young people congregate. You know, so schools, malls, bus depots, train stations, right, and sporting events. You know, music concerts, things like that.
Anywhere where young girls and young women go, they're there.
And so you'll have that element. You also have the online grooming element to it as well, and there's been a huge increase in that, in the use of social media and the like, with the recruitment of young females into the sex trade. But then you also have other types of pimps and traffickers. I don't know if you've heard the term guerrilla pimps.
Guerrilla pimps?
Yeah.
No, never heard of it.
So that's individuals, traffickers who use violence and control over the female rather than the finesse approach of the boyfriend, you know, purporting to be something. Clearly they're not, and there's never that intention from that trafficker.
Okay, we're going to get more into the relationship between the victim and the people that are perpetrating these crimes in a bit. But I want to put up a map. Okay, so this is, you know, we established this plays out across our province, but look at this map that we're going to put up here. This is the 401 corridor. This is where the trafficking plays out a lot in our province. Highway, many of us drive all the time, Martin.
Yep.
Your team polices the southwest part of the GTA and Oakville. Where are these crimes on the 401 taking place?
I would say to you that the 401 is the main hub corridor for trafficking. I call it the virtual track because it's all behind closed doors. Every hotel and motel along that corridor will have trafficked victims in it at some point.
Every hotel and motel, and there are
Pretty much.
hundreds
And I
of
would be
them.
confident in saying that to you, yes. And the same with the QEW. Our predominant area in Halton region is the QEW. So from Toronto right out to Niagara Falls, you know, you look at the hotels and motels along that corridor, and every single one of them will house trafficked victims at some point in time.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. We're not about like the sleazy motel. You're talking
Yes.
every hotel,
And
5-star, 3-star, 1-star, doesn't matter.
It knows no boundaries. In actual fact, there's been a real shift away from sleazy, budget, low-end motels towards your mainstream hotels that are out there, yeah, for sure.
Olivia, you have visited some of these hotels and motels during your investigation that you did for the Toronto Star. Take me inside one of them. What's it like?
Well, and we went to mostly kind of the lower kind of sleazy motels, as you were just talking about, along the 401 when we initially started looking into sex trafficking, and we wanted to see if we could actually find it. So down some of these, in these motels, you know, it's dark and there's not a lot of people around at night. And often there are men standing outside doors, just chain smoking or waiting around, looking through the curtains, seeing what's going on inside the room, but not actually stepping inside. So that led us to think that maybe they were traffickers or pimps waiting for their girl who had a client at the time. You also can see men coming into these motels in really flash, expensive cars, doing laps of the parking lot and then pulling up and waiting, and a young girl gets out and goes inside a room, and these men sit in the car on iPads and are watching movies while they wait for her. We went to one motel in Mississauga during the investigation, and it was very blatant that we could see sex trafficking. We saw a young woman go into a motel room, and then we saw an airport limousine driver pull into the car park and kind of look around and see who was watching him. And then he walked up and knocked on her door, went into her room, and we timed it. Exactly half an hour later, he came out. And then 5 minutes later, another man pulled into the car park, went into the same room, knocked on the door, went inside, and exactly half an hour later, he too came out. So it just became very blatant in just the few nights that we went out that this is happening all around us. And the victims I spoke to also mentioned the higher end hotels like the Sheraton, the Hilton in downtown Toronto as well.
Here's Olivia explaining, you know, she in her work shows up there as an observer, can see what's going on. And this is a crime that's happening somewhat in the open. I mean, how do these girls get to these car parks? Someone drives them. So presumably a taxi driver, the people who clean hotel rooms, the people that work at hotel rooms. How come, I don't know if this is the right word, are these people also complicit in what's going on? That's probably the wrong word, but
Yeah.
Are they turning a blind eye?
No, I wouldn't use that. In actual fact, it's interesting you bring that point up, because when I first got brought in to start the unit up in Halton, I realised there was a huge gap in the education and knowledge base of a lot of these individuals. And so what we did in Halton was we actually carried out in 2013, it would have been now, hotel training to highlight signs of human trafficking to hoteliers. And I actually said to all of my hoteliers that have hotels in our region, I don't want you to send your general manager. I want you to send your cleaning staff. I want you to send your maintenance staff. I want you to send your front of house staff. That's who I want to see at this training, because that's who we need to educate. We have a fantastic relationship with hoteliers within the region, generally across the board, and they provide us with a lot of information, a lot of intelligence in relation to the comings and goings that are there. And so from my perspective, in our region, we certainly have bridged the gap so that these people can be our eyes and ears. In law enforcement, we're only a small piece of the machine, a small cog in the machine, and we have to engage in our community, and we've been doing that.
What are you telling them to look out for?
Just the signs of, you know, someone booking a room and then the natural fact you never see that individual. You see a female, you know, comings and goings, frequent comings and goings from a room. Someone who doesn't have any identification. Someone who's looking to the male in the supposed relationship for guidance with everything. Someone who's not able to answer questions. Someone who maybe looks bruised, looks in a state of disarray. A young girl turning up with multiple suitcases, because a lot of the time these girls are just transported from hotel to hotel throughout the country, not just the province, and that is their life in that suitcase. So things like that, you know, and then the whole do not disturb sign being in the door of the hotel room throughout the guest stay. It's unusual, right?
Yeah, it's also very common for them to ask for towels multiple times throughout the day.
Asking for towels.
They're asking their clients to shower before they engage in sexual activity with them, and they're also showering multiple times. So things like this, if cleaning staff could be aware of simple things like this, it would also really help them understand the phenomenon of what domestic human trafficking looks like.
Let me ask you this. Martin said earlier, you know, there's this approach that, yeah, I'm your boyfriend, or I want to be your boyfriend, and this is how I get a hold of you. What's the other? How do they advertise to young women, like, come be part of this awful criminal enterprise? I mean, how do they reach these young girls?
So one of the major myths and misconceptions is that pimps and traffickers are often strangers. They're not going to be someone you know quite well, but they might be, you might have mutual friends with them on Facebook, or they might be friends of your cousin. Like, you have a connector link, you have somebody in common, usually. It could be a stranger. So there's a little bit of a safety thing that you're not totally as nervous about because of the dynamic that you have a person in common. So it starts off like that, and it really masks itself as a relationship. I know in 85% of our clients, they identify their pimps, their traffickers to be their boyfriends. And so they're looking to court them in a relationship. They're making them feel so incredibly loved and special in a way that no one's ever made them feel before. So it almost seems like, how did I luck out? How did I get somebody that loves me this much and is taking care of me this much? So it really starts off in something that we call the honeymoon stage.
And then, but it's not an overt ask, right? Like, there isn't a hashtag, come be a victim of these awful crimes. Where do you make that, like, I befriend you, I tell you you're perfect, I love you, and then is it coercion?
I mean, there are a few stages in between. So it starts off as this loving, caring relationship. They're going to have sex with you in a way that you think it might only happen in a movie. They're going to make you feel so incredibly loved and special, and they're going to do that, and then they're going to pull away. And then they're going to be so incredibly loving and pull away, and you're like, what did I do wrong? How can I get back in his good books? I'll do anything to make things go back to the way they were before. They're going to take you shopping. They're going to get your hair done, your nails done. Slowly, they'll have sex with you and do that right after. And then slowly, that will be replaced with sex and then money. And so your brain starts associating sex with a reward. And then it turns into, you know, all that stuff I bought you, you're indebted to me, or you know, that house and that lifestyle we could have together, this is how we could do it. You know, that back page ad, look how much money this girl's making. We could only do this, we'd only have to do this for 3 months, and then we'd never have to work again, and we could have everything we've always wanted and start that family. It really looks like a relationship.
I want to read something, because it actually echoes what you just said. This comes from the Covenant House website. So here's what was written on their website. Victims often suffer the Stockholm syndrome. Their sympathies lie with their abusers, or their feelings are complex and ambivalent. Since many traffickers pose as romantic interests, victims develop a trauma bond, a relationship where a cycle of intermittent rewards and punishments create a powerful attachment to their abusers. They will often swing between a desire to press charges and to rekindle the relationship. How apt do you think that is?
I think it's quite true. You know, with our Indigenous girls, the experiences they have are very unique in this. We have girls that are extremely vulnerable due to the impact of colonization. I think with everything we're seeing in the media and what we know with Truth and Reconciliation, this is very true. These girls are coming from homes that have generations of trauma that they're dealing with, and it's very, very intergenerational. I've seen families where the girls are introduced to the trade by family members. The Native Women's Association of Canada reports that this is common, as well as, you know, coming out of places like group homes, child welfare. I've had girls that get introduced to pimps coming out of incarceration. They come out and they have no links to any support mechanisms. And just as Carly pointed out, I've seen girls with this syndrome where they are so vulnerable that the first person they're introduced to that shows them something different, really they attach to it, and they're unable to break that cycle, and they find it confusing themselves. And when you're dealing with these girls, our Indigenous girls, the vulnerability is systemic. And often when they walk through these doors, their interactions are really negative. So if somebody points something to them that's beautiful, they will take it. And I have girls that are attending trauma counseling with Carly that we're seeing this and breaking that, nightmares, residual effects of it, blaming, a lot of victimization, and it's continual, so absolutely.
Are these girls urban, Indigenous girls? Are they coming from reserves as well?
Well, it's interesting. They are, they are urban. They are coming from reserves. What's really interesting is when you show that 401 corridor, it's interesting to me because I look beyond that corridor. I look across the province in Ontario. I look between Toronto, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, North Bay, Thunder Bay. These girls are coming from their reserve communities into urban centers. So as an example, through Native Women's, we think about going down to the bus station at Bay and Dundas to meet these girls when they get off the buses because pimps are waiting for them. They recognize them. Our girls are very beautiful, very distinctive in the way they look, and sometimes they're seen as victims. I've had girls that are coming off of the bus from going home to see their families from university that get approached. Do you want to work? So that corridor is very true. I know that our girls are moving from there, but I also know of the incidences in Northern Ontario and around there. So it's very complex in how we look at it.
Okay, Olivia did very good work on this story for the Star, and she talked to victims. So I want to play a little bit of this. This is about the control pimps have over their victims. So let's hear some of the victims themselves talking.
You're trained like a robot from these guys. All you know is work, money, eat, sleep. Work, money, eat, sleep. You have to be where they say. You have to listen to them like you're their slave.
They were in control of everything.
What I wore, what I ate.
When I slept and how long I slept for.
When I showered, when I went to bed, when I woke up.
What I ate, when I ate.
How much money I could keep on me, nail color, everything.
Olivia Carville, there's so much in that even short clip of stresses these women are under. I mean, what stood out for you when you talked to these women?
One of the most startling things I found from speaking to all these victims was that control factor that these men had over them and their entire lives. You know, these girls, they're young, most of them, when they meet their traffickers. They're falling in love for the first time, and they just don't understand this dark world they're being pulled into. And it was quite frightening for me speaking to each of these women who were coming forward and how brave they were and how courageous they were to actually sit down and relive that nightmare, relive that horror story in order for us to get a story out there on sex trafficking. So I was quite taken aback by that aspect of their bravery.
Martin, help me understand this. You're the guy who helps crack down on the people that are perpetrating these crimes, the pimps. I don't know if I want to actually understand why they do what they do, but help me understand what they're in it for.
Do you know what? It's so lucrative, the money that can be made. You know,
it's just
even
money.
from
I don't
one
care
girl.
what I'm selling if it's human being.
And to be honest, what I would say to you though is that, and I often find it, we talk about the victims in this particular crime type having, you know, real issues in their background a lot of the time. You know, perhaps they've been a victim of domestic violence, you know, sexual violence as a child, and you know, a number of other areas. But in actual fact, what I find also a lot of the time is that the perpetrators of this particular crime type, as is the case a lot of the time with sexual violence, as is in the case with domestic violence, these perpetrators have actually been victimized at some point in their life as well, and they come from broken homes often, and they have been victims of sexual violence, of physical abuse as a child. And so there is, I do honestly see a direct correlation between the two a lot of the time. I don't know if the girls would agree with that, but I certainly see that quite a lot.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, you know, often it's interesting because I had questions that they say, you know, are Indigenous men trafficking our women? Well, that's a perfect example when you look at the trauma and the effects of residential school and generations of child welfare, what it did to the roles from a gender perspective. The Truth and Reconciliation, the report that was just released, really points out how skewed gender is in my community and the roles of our men and our women. Traditionally, our women are sacred. they are the bearers of life. They give, they are the most important, and men treat them that way. And so you can just see by what's going on that this is something that is completely changed, you know, and so perpetrating this violence is not something that they are, it doesn't define them, it defines the experiences that they've come from. So really getting at the root causes is what is very important. And absolutely, a lot of these men that perpetrate are victims in their own right. It's not a nice way to look at it, but it's true.
I think there's also something to be said about if you get caught with guns, there's physical evidence on you. If you get caught with drugs, there's physical evidence on you. If you know, and so if you get caught with a young woman, with a girl, you can say this is my girlfriend, you can say this is my sister, you can say this is my friend. It's much harder to prove because there's no physical evidence.
I want to play another clip from Olivia's work. So this is, she spoke to a guy, and I might get the pronouncer wrong here, Olivia, Matthew Diaco, is that how I say his name?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, Matthew Diaco, he's been charged with human trafficking. Olivia interviewed him. He's inside the Toronto East Detention Centre. So let's hear from him.
Most of these girls, like I said, they're broken. It's not hard. You just gotta answer their call. You get in there, you find the crack. Like, some are drugs, some are just, they need to hear I love you. Every girl's had that fantasy wedding in that house with a pink fence. You sell it to her. She'll do it.
Why will she do it?
You just sold her a dream.
Olivia Carville, has this guy been convicted of human trafficking?
I think his trial is set to begin this year.
So we'll wait and see.
So not yet.
Okay. Well, to what extent are these people like him, people who are charged? I mean, how many charges have we seen in this province? Are there lots of them?
Yeah, there are a lot of charges coming through, but unfortunately, the conviction rate in Ontario is quite low, significantly low, actually. In one particular court of justice, the conviction rate was only 7%. And that was a major finding in our investigation, was how you've got, you know, it's a growing crime and police are pressing a lot more charges, but these cases are falling apart when they reach the courts. And they're falling apart for a wide range of reasons, but one of the major ones is victims recanting their testimony. So we've heard from police who are saying that these girls are actually reaching out to these men during the trial. Some of them are so traumatized they're throwing up on the stand when they hear that their former trafficker, or who they believed was their boyfriend, can see them via video link during the trial. They're asking their lawyers if they can go to the bathroom to put makeup on. So it's no surprise that once they actually get to the stand, that they don't want to testify against this man that they've loved for all these years. Because he can sometimes...
Yeah. Olivia's pretty much nailed it there with that, to be perfectly honest. You know, I think historically, or certainly, there's been a shift again in policing. I want to kind of tell you a bit about our approach. We in Halton are victim-centric, and I'm keen to continually push that out there. You can't in policing and in law enforcement build your case solely based on victim testimony. It's doomed to failure straight away, truthfully. So what you have to do is you have to take that victim, and they're very vulnerable, you know, and I feel that we, and certainly in Halton, do a very good job with victims, but you can't be solely reliant on that victim's testimony, because that is a huge burden of pressure on that individual, that young person's shoulders when it comes to a point when they're at trial. So what we have to target more and more cohesively is the ancillary evidence around these crimes, so that even when the victim is testifying in a court of law, you have other pieces of evidence that point to one singular conclusion, which is that the person sitting in the dock there is a trafficker. So, do you understand what
I understand what you're saying. I mean, we see this in sexual assault cases
Correct.
all the time, and domestic violence as well. But here's the number: 2 human traffic convictions ever in Toronto. 34 in this country. Here we are talking about a growing problem, exponentially growing. Police doing better work on this front. and yet 2 people have been convicted. What does that say to you?
We need to train judges. We have a lot of work to do. The police are working tirelessly. We can see that in the number of search warrants related to domestic human trafficking, to arrests made related to domestic human trafficking. We need to really do a bunch of education to Crowns, to Defense Counsel, to judges. We need them to understand what this phenomenon looks like. This is not just a relationship that turned bad and that someone is trying to, to get back at their boyfriend. This is modern day slavery.
I think, I'm sorry, just what Carly said there, I truly believe that the best tool to combat human trafficking in Canada and in North America in general right now is education. Forget enforcement and everything surrounding that, education. Because if we don't educate people, if we don't educate our youth, if we don't educate our parents that are out there, our judges, our prosecutors, our medical practitioners, our hoteliers, if we don't educate these people, then we don't make them knowledgeable, and then you can't empower them if they're not knowledgeable. So you have to educate, and it really boils down to that. And in order to make any inroads into this heinous crime, you have to educate. And we are really trying and pushing that constantly. And in our region, we actually go into our high schools and educate our youth who are coming to high school on the whole Romeo pimp trafficker scenario, on the online grooming side of things, to educate them, to empower them, to give them that knowledge base to make the correct decision, even if they come from a background where they've had turmoil.
We only got a few minutes left. For the girls, for the women, Lori, that are lucky enough to get to the other side, to escape, for their pimps to be busted, however they get to the other side, when they're finally spit out on the other end of this, what kind of transitional services do they require, and do we have them in this province?
I think we're lacking. I see it every day in my job as an advocate. We need exit strategies that work. So housing is huge. One of the biggest challenges that we face is where to put the girls when they come out. And they often age out of programs because the programming is really set up to 25 through maybe up to 29 for counseling services, things like that. But they really require support. So from my community perspective, it's about the cultural lens. What does that look like? Reminding our women what their roles are, who they were before impact and how they get back there. Having them in ceremony, having them surrounded by a community of people that believe in that strength. Some of the most resiliency comes within the Indigenous community. I think that's really obvious. Through all the things we're seeing in the media, but housing is huge, educational attainment, very big, financial supports, and really just having a soft landing place.
I got 20 seconds left. Enough support in Ontario for all this? You got 20 seconds.
Pressure's on. At East Metro Youth Services, we have a trauma-based program, and we need to expand this. So we need to have services that are specific to the trauma needs of survivors of domestic human trafficking. We need to have people with lived experience on our staff teams. We need people who are peer support workers and peer mentors to provide this support. And we need to get into schools and do not fear-based, but just education on healthy relationships. So young people know how to protect themselves and make smart choices.
Good work. Thank you to all of you. Olivia, exceptional work here in Canada. We wish you were back here reporting for one of our papers, but hope you're enjoying New Zealand.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all 3 of you here in our studio. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.